Me, along with my husband Zygmunt, would like to welcome you to Chopin Theater. We are honored to be your host tonight for the Fuller Award Lifetime Achievement presented to Mr. Rick Kogan. Before we begin, I think I should explain what you walked into here. We are at the main stage on the set for the House of the Exquisite Corpse presented by Rough House Theater. Essentially, it is a puppet anthology peep show for the warriors in the room. You see the performance by hearing it to any opening, slit, crack, what have you. In fact, where you're sitting, we have this puppet installation here, which we glued to get ready for this evening. And this particular production is really emblematic of the sort of work we do here at the theater. It's things are suspended from the air, things move around, it's loud, chaotic, but the work is always original, creative, and often experimental. There are 8 to 10 performances each week across both stages, primarily theater, but also film, classical music, jazz, and literary evenings like tonight. After the presentation, we hope you will join us downstairs at the Chopin Studio Theater for a reception catered by 3 restaurants very dear to Mr. Kogan's heart. Again, welcome to Chopin Theater. I hope you enjoy your time with us.
I am an American, Chicago-born. Chicago, that somber city, and go with things as I have taught myself, freestyle, and will make the record in my own way. First to knock, first admitted, sometimes an innocent knock, sometimes not so innocent. But a man's character is his fate, says Heraclitus. And in the end, there isn't any way to disguise the nature of the knocks by acoustical work on the door or by gloving the knuckles. With all the literate people in this room, at least 90% of you will recognize that as the opening of a novel by a Chicago writer inducted into the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame's first class. It was, of course, The Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Eagle, a Chicago Literary Hall of Fame board member. And on behalf of all of us at the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame, I would like to welcome you to tonight's Fuller Award ceremony honoring the lifetime achievements of the inimitable Rick Kogan. I'm here in place of Rick's longtime friend, Randy Albers, and these are his words. I will try to imbue them with the same admiration and affection that Randy would if he were here tonight. So just imagine me a little older, a lot wiser, and with a hell of a lot more panache. Okay, back to Randy's words. The Augie March quote is worth examining tonight for at least 2 reasons. First, Rick himself used it to open the first edition of Chicago Classics, the reading series he invented and hosted at the Story Week Festival of Writers for many years. So it obviously carries special meaning for him. Second, let's face it, Chicago-born Rick has been knocking on doors, literal and metaphorical, throughout our beloved city since he published his first real piece of journalism as a teenager. The sound of those knocks echo over the decades like the sound of typewriter keys. And the resulting stories in newspapers, in books, on the radio, and in conversation over drinks at the Billy Goat or 100 other bars in the city, again, remember Randy's words, have left an indelible impression upon his legion of admirers. Who else could pack the Chopin on a blustery Tuesday night with people ready to give him his due? He has reached the status of legend. Sorry, Rick, it's true. And of course, the award he is to receive tonight is meant to recognize and laud his extraordinary achievements in various media and set him firmly in the line of other Fuller Award winners. People who represent the best of the tradition of Chicago's literary greats. Check the list in tonight's program for previous award winners if you don't believe me. These are people with a huge body of work and with no signs of slowing down until more is written. But of course, the writing is only part of the reason we're here tonight. There's also Rick, the man, who gets as much pleasure out of speaking with a young writer struggling to make it, or a peanut vendor on an Eisenhower off-ramp, as with literary, political, religious, and other cultural leaders of our city. They all respect his They all reflect his deep love of people, of story, and of Chicago. What better person to honor then than this writer and this man who has not yet found a door he doesn't want to knock on to reveal one more corner of our city and our own relation to it. A great deal of credit for getting us all here tonight, of course, goes to the Literary Hall of Fame's indefatigable leader, Don Evans, who tonight promised you not only a sterling program honoring Rick, but also great food afterward. It's a party, folks, as befits a guy like Rick, so let's enjoy ourselves. And now, to lead us through the rest of tonight's program, I bring you another shining figure in Chicago journalism, Brian Hieggelke. As Rick himself could testify, it is no mean feat to keep a newspaper going for 35 years. But Brian and his hardworking creative wife, Jan, have managed to do just that with the highly regarded barometer of Chicago culture, Newcity. We're happy that he joins us tonight here to honor Rick, so please give a warm welcome to Brian Hieggelke.
Thank you. Before I forget, someone asked me to make a reminder to turn off cell phones, silence them, etc. And if you haven't, that would be a good time to do that. I am Brian Hieggelke from Newcity Magazine, and I am your MC tonight. A few weeks ago, when they asked me to do this, I had one thought. I guess they can't get Kogan for this. It's a sign of his generosity of spirit that Rick Kogan's the go-to master of ceremonies for all things cultural in Chicago. Yet it's such a minor part of his biography it doesn't even make his Wikipedia page. He's one of the city's best radio men. He's had a long run on WGN. He has the best voice on radio, whiskey and cigarettes and words in the ether. But tonight we're here for the Literary Hall of Fame, so we're here to honor his writing. Rick Kogan is the last true newspaper man in Chicago, a trade that was always his destiny. His father, Herman Kogan, was himself a legendary Chicago newspaper man, radio host and writer of books about this city's people and places. His mother, Mary Lou, no slouch herself in the intersecting words of journalism, PR, and advertising. Their son, Rick, was raised in Old Town when it was the epicenter of Bohemian Chicago, in a home where the coffee table rivaled the Algonquin for its rotating cast of characters with names like Algren, Turkle, and Saul. By the age of 16, an age when most of us were picking out powder blue tuxes for prom, Rick Kogan was already a journalist with a byline in the Sun-Times covering the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Thus began an astonishingly broad and varied career at the Daily News, the Sun-Times, and mostly the Tribune, where he continues today to craft singular and essential prose, most often but not always on Sundays. He's been an editor too, including a run overseeing the copy of the legendary Ann Landers. And then there's the dozen or so books, a bibliography certainly anchored in his hometown, but with subjects ranging from a biography of the aforementioned Landers to a true crime chronicle co-authored with a Tribune colleague to a history of the Billy Goat Tavern. But it's Sidewalks, the two-volume compilation of the long-running column for the Sunday Chicago Tribune magazine that he collaborated on with photographer Charles Osgood, that might be his magnum opus, a successor in the canon of newspaper column writing at its most artful that runs from Ben Hecht to Mike Royko and straight on through to the work of these two. Last night, I decided to brush up on Kogan's oeuvre with a visit to the Harold Washington Library, where I was able to check out all of the aforementioned volumes. But there was one I really wanted. I found out that it was too precious for general circulation, that I'd have to request it from the reference desk, where a librarian, disturbed for perhaps the first time all day, eyed my approach warily. I made my request and she returned a blank stare, a ploy to deflect me from my mission, I assumed. Unavered, I gave her the call numbers, and under the condition that I leave my identification as collateral and stay close by, I could look at the book. What was this Gutenberg Bible I saw it? None other than the legendary Dr. Nightlife's Chicago, an intimate and informative guide to the city's best entertainment, published back in 1979. I was entranced as I paged the book, first by Mike Royko's, hopefully in jest, hilariously disparaging introduction, and then into the best writing about bars and nightclubs the city has ever seen. Let me share a part of the entry about Old Town Ale House, one of a handful of places still around and still maintaining most of its original charm. Kogan wrote, and this is unfortunately not his voice. I've heard stories that the ale house is a rather pleasant place during the daylight hours, an interesting blend of bleached bohemians, drinkers, dogs, theater people, and artists. But I have only been here late at night, on the third leg of the notorious triangle that includes Ricardo's and O'Rourke's. And during those hours, everybody is a drinker. And if there is a dog in the place, it is probably dead. As the woman, now asleep under the pinball machine, seems to be. Rick is apparently named after that late great watering hole, Ricardo's, and that's fitting. For whether you're listening to him on the radio or reading his poetic sentences crafted with deadline speed, you always feel like you're sitting at the barroom table with the most erudite, inclusive, and eloquent man you've ever met. Tonight, Rick's fans and admirers will join together in tribute, and I expect it will feel like Rick's Cafe Chicagoan. Many of tonight's speakers are legends in their own right, so I direct you to the program where you can read up on those you don't yet know. First up is Nestor Gomez, the legendary boss of the Moths, who will share a story that will ring true for so many of us who've reached out to Rick at some time.
Everybody see me? This thing kind of high. I was going to start by saying that when I was a little kid, but as you can see, I'm still little. So when I was a much younger kid living in Guatemala, I approached my uncle and asked him to read a story I had written. This was a huge thing for me for several reasons. Reason number one, my uncle was a school teacher, one of the few people in my family that loved writing and reading. So I look up to him. Reason number two, back then I was extremely shy, and I often shy away from talking to people. It took a lot of courage for me to ask my uncle to read my story. Reason number three, don't worry, it's only three reasons. Due to a severe stutter, the reason for my shyness, writing was a preferred form of communication for me. Back then, I feared that I was never going to be able to speak properly. But I hope that at least through my stories, I could communicate my feelings, hopes, and ideas with others. But my uncle not only read my story, he also provided harsh commentary. I know that he probably meant well, but at the age of 8 years old, hearing, among other things, that I had committed too many orthographic errors, my characters were weak and boring, and my plot made no sense, was a bit too much for me to hear. It shattered my dreams of becoming a writer. Although I did continue writing, but I banished my writings to the confines of my underwear drawer. Over the years, the occasion when my poems or stories dared to see the light of the day were far in between. Fast forward to March 2014. Many years after my family had emigrated to Chicago, Rick Kogan was doing a reading at the Chicago Cultural Center. To be honest, I had no idea who Rick Kogan was. But my wife, who just happens to be an English teacher, and we had just started dating. And she had gotten us tickets to the event. So of course I wanted to be cool, I wanted to go with her. I went to the event reluctantly. But at the end of the event, I was so glad that she convinced me to tag along. Mr. Kogan did a reading which captivated the audience, including me. After the event, I approached him and made a comment about how when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. To my surprise, he gave me his email address and suggested that I send him one of my stories. At home, I told my wife about my conversation with Mr. Kogan, but she warned me. He was probably just being nice. I doubt that he has time to answer your email, let alone read your story. Well, I have nothing to lose, I responded. and I decided to write him anyway. To my surprise, a couple of days later, Mr. Kogan not only responded to my email, but he actually read my story. I know because he made some reference to the story in his email, and he also encouraged me to continue writing. Now, this is the part of the story, or my story, that you heard so far, where the novice writer gets motivated, that's me, and goes on to become a successful writer. And yes, in a way, that's what happened. I have become a kind of a successful storyteller. I have won 70-something most slams. And I know what you're thinking right now. This story is not very good. The plot was obvious and cliche. So please, don't be like my uncle. Don't be haters. Because that's not the point of my story, and that's not where the story ends. My example is just one of many. I am but one of hundreds, if not thousands, of the many people Mr. Kogan has helped, encouraged, and motivated through his years. His commitment to the advancement of the literary arts in Chicago is extensive and profound, not only due to his body of work as an online reporter, commentator, interviewer, writer, host for a lot of television and radio outlets, and much more, but because of his constant and selfless support for emerging and fellow artists. Look around this room tonight. Well, when they turn on the lights, look around the room. And you will see many people, including myself, who will always be grateful to Mr. Kogan. And one more thing about Mr. Kogan. Every time that I approach him and thank him for his support or talk to him about his accomplishments, he always talks about my accomplishments instead. And even tonight, I was talking to him, and he introduced me with somebody, and he was talking about my book. He's always doing that. He's always putting others before himself. He hates every time that I praise him, he hates it. So, of course, we're here together to praise him tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Nestor. I think that's a story that so many of us can relate to, that have over the years have asked Rick for anything, and he's been so willing, I'm sure to his own chagrin sometimes, to pitch in and help out. Next up, we have, hang on, I've got to get can you guys hear okay in the back, by the way? Okay, great. We have the legendary singer, storyteller, and musician, Jamie O'Reilly, and she'll be joined by Michael Miles, legend of the banjo, who'll play the piano. The guitar.
Thank you. Michael, you want to get set up now? I'm so grateful to have Michael playing guitar tonight. I'm going to talk to you first. At my exit interview in 1981 from DePaul School of Music, my college advisor said to me, "You don't have the voice for opera. Unless you can dance, you're not going to do a musical theater. You might as well teach." And I didn't heed his advice, because what I was interested in really was the humanities, art, music, literature, and as I came to realize, history, specifically Chicago history. My own family had come here at the turn of the last century. My grandfather was rewiring Humboldt Park for electric. He was an electrician, but his brother, Uncle Tex O'Reilly, was working the crime beat for the Chicago Tribune. And when he did a stint at the Interocean, my Uncle Tuck, Irwin St. John Tucker, was his editor. Both of them write about that meeting in their books. Tex happened to also be the subject of Lowell Thomas's book, Born to Raise Hell. And Uncle Tuck married my great aunt Nell, who had been one of the first students at the School of the Art Institute, a dancer, a model, and an illustrator for the Daily Socialist. Among the papers where O'Reilly Tuckers worked for the next 100 years were the Interocean, the Christian Socialist, Herald American, Chicago American, Chicago Daily News, the Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Herald American, and now, as I said, for the Daily Socialist, also contributed for over 40 years poetry to Chicago's newspapers. Of course, we know that Rick also comes from from newspaper heritage with his folks. But that wasn't how we connected. The way that we connected initially was through the Chicago Cultural Center, because I discovered that my interest really was in culture, and we had a center for that in Chicago, which was a rare thing for someone who couldn't dance and couldn't sing opera. And I did pay my dues. When I had my wisdom teeth pulled out and my cheeks were out to here, I happened to be booked at Dirty Dick's Salon that night, and as I sang Danny Boy, everyone was very quiet and respectful until I realized that when they started cheering when I was finished, it was because beyond the chicken wire, they were all watching the White Sox clinch the pennant. I sang in Bridgeport on a Budweiser float, singing Bear Down, Chicago Bears. And some of those nightmarish excuses for gigs taught me again that there was something more. What Rick and I shared as friends was a deep love of Studs Terkel. And it was through Studs' work on the radio that I really found what I was interested in, which was to listen to and talk about and sing about Chicago's people. And of course, Studs did that like no one else. And as I think about you, and I think about what you've done for all of us, what I realize is not as much a storyteller, but a story gatherer. That's what we do, those of us that love this great city. And that's what I feel so honored to be a part of tonight. When I do appear on Rick's radio show, and I've done it a fair amount, one of the amazing things about it is initially this very frightened person saw that across from me on the microphone was someone who knew about me and did his homework. He's a wonderful host. He doesn't ask you what you do, he asks you why you do it. And it helps us. It helps us when we can define what our mission is and look for that purpose. Cue the music. So I want to leave my little bit of the story before I sing for you with the little message that my great-grandmother, Mary Ann Murphy, said about those of us dreamers that are considered artists making our way in this world. She said, all you really need are some good pots, some good bedding, and some good books. And I'd like to add to that some good songs and some good friends. The turning of in painted rounds, the time of the universal clock slowing down. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
The turning of the planets, thank you, in their appointed rounds, the timing of the universal clock slow winding down, the bright blue star of morning to greet the risen sun. Every sense and mind agrees, an artist lives in all of these, one who knows intrinsically such things are finely done, such things are finely done. The forest turns to summer for a million shades of green, as the sea turns to the sunlight every sense and mind of degrees. An artist lives in all of these. One who knows intrinsically such things are finely done. Such things are finely done. Some say it was the Big Bang, others 7 days. But in this clockwork universe, with its convoluted ways, there's doubt for those with evidence, faith for those with none. Every sense and mind of artist lives in all of these. One who knows intrinsically such things are finely done. Such things are finely done.
Nicely done. All right.
Thank you. I should note that it was Jamie who mentioned I should remind you not to have your cell phones turned on. So it was some sort of, I guess, poetic vengeance that it was during her talk that it went off. But if you have not yet turned off your cell phones, that would be a good time to do that. One of the things that I didn't mention, because I didn't know that much about it till I chatted with Jamie and Michael before the show, is that another thing that is probably not on Rick's Wikipedia page is that he is a performer and that he has done many shows with the two of them, not together, but separately. And it's another sort of humbling factoid that we can add to our list tonight. The next speaker is somebody that many of you know as a artist and poet and writer and actor, and he's somebody that I once described as the spiritual heir to Studs Terkel, which of course is something that we could also say about Rick Kogan, and I think that's appropriate because these two are kind of brothers from different planets. So if you could, please welcome the legendary Tony Fitzpatrick.
It's like this. I met Rick in 1981 at a memorial for Nelson Algren. I was a 19-year-old bum, and he took the time to be nice to me, and in my mother's estimation, set a fine example. Yeah, he did. In no time at all, I too could knock back 6, 7 shots of Jack Daniels with beer chasers and get the story, or at least be curious about the story. After some years of trying to keep up with Kogan, I stopped drinking. And let me tell you the first 50 words of every recovering alcoholic on the north side of Chicago. Hello, my name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic. Before I met Kogan, life was fine. I had a job. I had a girlfriend. I had all my limbs. I wasn't making out with biker girls wearing tube tops behind Marie's Riptide Lounge next to Armitage and the expressway there. That's where I met the love of my life, Roxy. Well, after Roxy dumped me, I woke up to the fact that I might have a little bit of an issue with the hooch. The Chicago literary landscape is littered with the corpses of those who thought they could match Rick drink for drink. They never knew what hit them. In my crystal ball, I could see into the future. In the Smithsonian, there's a jar of pickle juice with a yellow tape on it. And in that jar of pickle juice is Kogan's liver. And it says, here is Rick Kogan's liver, 9th wonder of the world. We finally found it. Somehow in all that carousing, japery, mayhem, and divine madness, Rick Kogan located us, we the people, the Chicagoans. And he told our stories. Really, he defined us, and in very short order, he had our number. He knew what spoke to us, what angered us, what moved us to find our better selves as artists, writers, actors, poets, citizens, activists, friends, and witnesses. If anyone ever asked me what Rick Kogan does, I tell them that he bears witness to our city. He provides our definition and unravels our mystery and helps us to understand each other. He does it with the three things my Irish mother told me every great writer needed: poetry, levity, and brevity. Someday there will be a great Kogan collection published, and that will be our city being able to honestly look at itself in a mirror. Nobody knows us, the Chicagoans, better. This award could not have found a more worthy or better recipient. Well done, pal. Now when I bless myself every night, it used to be Turco, Algren, Royko, bless me. Now it's Turco, Royko, Algren, Kogan, look after me, like you always do.
Well, I was going to start out saying what I have to say is going to be very short, and expect to hear a long applause. Thank you, thank you. Then I had all these jokes to tell, but then Tony told all the jokes, so. Kogan and I met. Can you all hear me in back? Should I actually talk into the microphone? We met on a story that Kogan was assigned to do a piece on Coco Taylor, Queen of the Blues. You all remember Coco? 1987. This was a cover story for the Friday section of the Tribune. And so we went down to her house somewhere on the south side, I think. And correct me, by the way, if I happen to say something inaccurate, I probably wouldn't happen, but if I do. So anyway, we did Coco Taylor. She was delightful. She had an interesting house and an interesting husband and interesting dogs. And then years later, Kogan was on the magazine, assigned to the magazine. He was assigned to take over this kind of horrible column at the beginning of the magazine. And he decided he wanted to do something different. He wanted to be able to go out and find stories, Chicago stories, and write about them, no matter what they were. Things are kind of unusual that you would never see in the Tribune normally. So he came up to me and he asked me if I wanted to photograph for it. I said, you bet, you know. To me, there's no better story in the world or job in the world than to go out and find your own story. So we did. So I said, well, how do we start? And he said, well, we go walk out the front door of the Tribune and start talking to people. So that's what we did, and it was really fun. And it's because he is so curious. He loves talking to people. He loves hearing their story and writing about it. And so Sidewalks is a fantastic column. He and I did it together for 13 years. And then I left the Tribune, and he did it alone for another 11. You're on now, right? So anyway, it has been a real delight and honor to work with you for all these years. One time, I think you said you got a message from somebody that was really excited about the fact that we went all over Chicago and we knew where we were going, and he said, nobody knows Chicago like Kogan and Osgood. And we looked at each other and said, what the hell, we get lost all the time. Put on a good story. Anyway, I'll make it quick. Some of our favorite stories were Big Kitty, where we drove down Roosevelt Road, around 5200 West, I think, something like that. And off to our right in the vacant lot was this gigantic cat sitting down, looking quite pleased. And we're wondering, what the hell is that? So we both, I slammed on the brakes. He slammed on his brakes. And we got out. I started taking pictures. Kogan went into the shop across the street to try to find out information about Big Kitty. And the first thing you said, you asked this guy was, so what's that cat across the street? And he said, what cat? That story led to three other stories. We have 4 stories off that cat. But we've also done a group of kids in Hyde Park calling themselves the Flock. They were just kids out having fun. They dressed up in newspapers, put newspaper hats on, and dressed in newspaper outfits, and they were the Flock. We also did a couple of celebrities, but one of them was your golfing buddy, Bill Murray. What is that guy's name, Bill Murray? And, and then this is the last one, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. So this isn't that funny, but it's kind of telling, is that we went to this used clothes shop where they had some really nice, mostly men's clothes, I think, wasn't it? Really nice sport coats and suits and whatever it is that men wear when they like to dress up. I'm not sure. So anyway, he after interviewing the guy that ran the place, we started looking at the clothes, and he got to this rack of sport coats, and he went over and he picked one up, and he said, Osgood, I think you should wear this. I think it'd look good on you. So I put it on, and he shakes his head. He says, yeah, it's yours. This is a sport coat. Thank you, Rick. All right, so now it's my turn to give you something. It really is an honor and a pleasure to give you this award for a lifetime achievement for one of the most curious and talented people I have ever met. Mr. Chicago, the guy that is Studs Terkel of this generation. Congratulations.
I'll take my name.
I have a feeling this is all in response to the many drinks I have bought most of you in my life. This is a big deal for me. I am more than overwhelmed. I also think it's a pretty big deal for a guy whose last piece in the paper was about Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, for Christ's sake. This is, I like to think, a sort of preview of my funeral. I'm glad it's being taped because you might be able to use this in 10 or 20 years with some shrewd editing. I have to thank the inexhaustible Don Evans and all the other members of the Literary Hall of Fame. I emceed the first two induction ceremonies, and one of the great lines in history, I'm driving up there with the love of my life, Kathy Murray, and she goes, well, who got in? Who are we inducting this year? I go, well, Saul Bellow, and I'm thinking I'm on the right, Saul Bellow, Nelson Algren, Mike Royko, Studs Terkel, and Gwendolyn Brooks. And Kate looks at me and goes, Jesus, who the fuck got in last year? Speaking of Kathy Murray, who is sitting here, and I'm not going to embarrass her, but not only did she save my life when I got slammed and in the hospital with COVID, and the attendant problems that arose from that, she did not only save my life, she makes my life worth living. I've seen so many old friends here tonight. I could just, you know what I could do? I could just go, hey, thanks Joe Shanahan for those tickets, thank Alton Miller for those drinks, thank Kevin Guilfoyle for being you, thank Jim Codall. I'm not gonna do that. I wanna ask you all, and I'm gonna answer this as best I can, why do we do what we do? There are plenty of you out there, editors, musicians, artists, teachers, lawyers, actors, you know, assorted riffraff and others. But mostly in that, I see ghosts. And I think that's the sort of burden of an honor like this. Ghosts of all the people who have helped me mold my life, who have shaped and shared my life. There's my father and mother, there's Mike and Studs, there's Dick Christensen, there's Bill Newman. There are hundreds of people who have made me who I am. This honor completely aside from that. I've been at this a long time. And I think part of the reason is the first sound I ever heard, and Mark can attest to this, my brother, was the sound of my father typing, piston-like, 2 fingers on a typewriter in the front office, tiny office that was more like a closet where he wrote books about Chicago and the characters in Chicago, and imbued in both of us, I think, a love of the city and a love of the word. We would come back from seeing Spartacus, for instance, at what was the McVickers Theater downtown, and we'd say, Dad, tell us about Spartacus, and he would, it's a burden for little kids, just hand us a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which we would, I think, Mark, sort of pretend to read, and then get our information about Spartacus from some of the other kids in the neighborhood. When we would sleep, Mark and I would be down the hall from the living room in the apartment in Old Town. And virtually every Saturday or Friday night, we'd be an uneasy sleep, and my mother would come in and say, okay, boys, come on, get up and say goodnight to all the nice people. And we would be dragged into that living room that was filled and frightening, a wild mix of people and conversations, of ice cubes banging against glasses, music pouring from the stereo, cigarette smoke that choked us. It was like fog. But the faces that accompany those memories are many. My parents had many friends, and some of them were famous, some of them were not, some of them were idiots, some of them were not. Many of them were writers. I can see James Jones is a name that sort of faded away. James Jones, built like a boxer and the author of From Here to Eternity, he slept on our living room couch for like 2 weeks. And our mom never explained that to me. Maybe she explained it to you, Mark. Well, I'm probably about 9, and who is this guy? There was wonderful, long-forgotten Willard Motley, whose novel Knock on Any Door had his hero Nick Romano spotting one of fiction's and Chicago's most memorable lines: live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. I remember him walking through the door and giving us silver pesos because he was hounded, because he's black. He was hounded from Chicago and from the United States and lived in Mexico. I became a published author when a poem of mine was printed in the LaSalle School, not the LaSalle Language Academy, it was just LaSalle School at the time. It was based on a guy I knew in Old Town, a man named Slim Williams, who had famously driven a dog sled down from Alaska to the Century of Progress exhibition in Chicago in 1933. I didn't grasp the exotic nature of that. He just seemed like a nice older guy. So this, ladies and gentlemen, Mark has never heard this, Kate has never heard this. I cannot imagine anyone has ever heard this poem before. And I'm sure you will say, well, of course he should get a Lifetime Achievement Award. For, if for nothing else, for the poem, My Friend, Slim Williams. I know a man, his name is Slim. I love to sit and listen to him. He tells of Juneau, Fairbanks, and Nome. The frozen north was long his home. Once he told me an interesting tale about a big white bear and a friendly whale. I would learn but not write more artful words. I did get to know, shortly after he wrote a book called The River Runs Through It, a great friend of my father's named Norman MacLean. And I am always rereading this, the end of that remarkable book. It has incredible meaning for me. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of those rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. Well, I am haunted by memories, knowing that we all fade away. Some people may remember the names of writers, may recall some words. Very few people recall or can remember Ann Landers, epiletterer, who was, in her day, the most syndicated columnist in the world. She told me something because I tried to get at what it was. Why was she so popular? And she wouldn't say, well, Rick, it's because I'm in 1,600 papers. She got a little deeper. And she told me, since I began writing the column, I have learned plenty. I have learned how it is with the stumbling, tortured people in this world who have nobody to talk to. The fact that my column has been successful underscores for me the central tragedy of our society, the loneliness, the insecurity, the fear that bedevils, cripples, and paralyzes so many of us. That is a sad commentary, but there is hope in there. There is hope in confronting that loneliness and fear. You fight against that in your own ways as a writer, as an artist, as a poet, as a teamster. A Lifetime Achievement Award, huh? The achievement, I think, is living, is carrying on in the face of that crippling loneliness and fear. The achievement is to keep writing, to keep breathing, to keep meeting people, to keep seeing things, to see and to grab life. It is not that hard if you can be as lucky as I have been, or as Brendan Bain put it, and I'm telling you to remember that he died at 41 years old. The most important things to do in the world are to get something to eat, something to drink, and somebody to love you. I can do that. I feel a sense of love and know that in ways large and small, I love all of you. Thanks.
So to that list of previously unknown accomplishments, we can now add published poet. And the question is,
Well, the other thing, I was 7 years old.
can we get that into the reference section of the Harold Washington Library?
Well, how about just on the cover of Newcity?
Well, that's easy. What a marvelous, marvelous conversation we're having. So our last event before we all convene for the after party is that we're going to bring you the man who spent most of his life making actors and playwrights angry, and decided recently to share that gift with politicians too. The legendary theater critic and now editorial page editor Chris Jones will join his colleague Rick in a brief conversation.
Got it?
Hello, everybody.
This is a real treat for me. Not only do I adore Chris, I respect him tremendously, but when I got COVID and spent 5 days in the brand new COVID ICU section of Northwestern Hospital in March of 2020, I learned through a grapevine that one of the editors, not my friend Doug George, idiot editor who has since left the Tribune, had assigned Chris to write my obituary. So keeping with the funereal theme of tonight, Chris, how can I help you?
it's still in the system. So we're just we're just gonna add to it. You know, that was actually the most surreal moment in my life because Kate, I was trying to talk to Kate to figure out how you were doing, and then our friend Lauren Stryker, we were trying to get a doctor in the room because at the time, as you know, when you had COVID, you couldn't, nobody could go in. So we were trying to get eyes on Rick. It was all about. So yeah, that was a night.
What would you like to know about me?
All right, so lifetime achievement. So I have two, I have two memories of people getting lifetime achievements. One was Terrence McNally at the Tony Awards, who came out literally with an oxygen tent and a whole apparatus, and he walked up to the microphone and he said, "Lifetime achievement, not a moment too soon." And then the other one was actually a friend of yours, David Mamet, who I know, who I wanted to ask you about, who is a good pal of yours, and he always said that the idea of lifetime achievement only means one thing to the artist. Don't you think that's just about enough? And the healthy artist would respond, "I'll be the judge of that. But at some point, I'll leave, but you'll probably have to kill me." So I guess my first question is, how are you feeling with this whole lifetime achievement thing?
Awkward and overwhelmed, but the real bonus is to see people, I have seen people in the last 2.5 years, but not like this. And many of the people I've seen tonight, I have not seen in nearly 3 years, and just seeing them and being with them, even I can't see your faces, is a real joy for me. It tells me that life is going to get better.
So this is daunting for me. Not only am I interviewing such a great interviewer, but Rick and I, during COVID, we would meet somewhere in the Viagra Triangle for precisely 3 drinks, actually, is the way we settled on it. And we would meet about every couple of weeks, and we would complain about people and complain about things, mostly the Tribune. And shall we say the bar for being a fucking idiot was pretty low. And it always makes me think, actually, that one of the keys to Rick Kogan, let me just say another story.
I think Tony addressed my drinking ability, so...
The other time I fell afoul of Rick Kogan, there's been a couple of... One was the obituary. The second one was I was tossing off some column, like you do, and I remember I called Rick Kogan a sentimental writer, or something like that.
Sentimentalist, yeah.
Sentimentalist.
I remember
And then
that,
my
yeah.
phone rings, and it's Michael Miner, who's the legendary, very fine media columnist from the Chicago Reader, and he said, "You called Rick Kogan a sentimentalist." And basically, how dare you? And he's really pissed. And I was like, oh no. I'd intended it as a compliment, but he, clearly this had sort of hit a nerve with my friend here. And
it was a small nerve. I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant. Mike was a little more pissed off than certainly I was, and I knew exactly what you meant. You meant I could be sentimental, and I can on occasion. I can be tearfully sentimental.
But I think the key to you, as I've observed you all these years, is partly that you do have, what's the word? An edge, a sort of a sense of you don't suffer fools all that gladly. You have an edge, and then you have this big beating heart in there, and it's the combination of those two things, which are very Chicago, I might add, that sort of softiness and the grit of the city, that is, I think, in part why we're all here. It's not just in, at things like this, people sort of say, oh, Rick he's done so much for me, and all of that's true, but the great writers have a combination of things.
You know, and Nelson was a great writer, but Nelson was an asshole. So I won't take that comparison to Nelson. But yeah, but it's like the city too. It's light and dark. It's hot and cold. It's tough and tender. That's the way I've always looked at life in general, Chris. I mean, I think in some of the great plays are like that, are they not? I don't know if Stanley Kowalski is. I don't see his tender side, but there might be one.
One of the things that we do when we have our drinks is we talk about newspapers. And of course, I listen to Rick talk about the glory days of our newspaper, which I'm old enough to remember at least some of, and indeed of the writers community that a lot of people talked about tonight. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but I'm very curious. So to some degree, you are now living in a world that's very changed from that, which I think we all know.
Yeah.
And there's a danger, perhaps, in idealizing the past or becoming
Sentimental?
Sentimental.
Always a danger in that, Chris.
Always a danger. So I guess my question is, if you look at the way the world has changed and the way this world that we love has atrophied, frankly, how do you deal with that?
How do I deal with the changing world of newspapers?
Yeah.
In the same way I dealt with the changing, wow, look, you can't use this typewriter anymore, you have to use this fucking computer. Okay, I'll figure it out. I still think there are people who read newspapers the old-fashioned way. I mean, they are of a certain age, I think. I see them on the bus. I use Twitter, I use Instagram. I get some feedback from people who only use those. If I could have figured out how to make a newspaper work, we'd be sitting pretty and not bitching about anything now. I think it's a changing face of commerce, and I do believe, now that I'm healthy, I could live to a day when there is no ink on paper product. I think that, frankly, I mean, those of you at the Sun-Times, if there are any of you here, I think that's, this merger with BEZ is a harbinger of that. I think eventually the Sun-Times will go all digital. And, will I cry? No, I'll still read the people I read in the Sun-Times. I'll adjust. I mean, that's part of the game here, man. You got to adjust to a changing world. Theater troubles me. I mean, when theaters close and theaters get all wrapped up in the, politically correct nonsense that they're wrapped up in now, I worry about the future of live theater, Chris, I do. And you've got to roll. I mean, there have been a lot of punches in life, man, and they hit everybody, and they hit all of us. You got to roll with them, or you got to curl up in a corner and start sobbing.
Let's extend that out to the city. So somebody in the program, I think, wrote that it was as if you were pickled in Chicago. You were in the brine of the city, which I think we would all agree is true. How do you find this city right now? What do you feel about this city that you've never really been able to leave, even though you could argue maybe you should and found the ubiquitous East Coast fame and fortune or something like that, but you never did. I think I don't know why you never did. I'll ask you that in a second, but I'm curious how you feel about our city right now.
My outlook is bleak. I see too many people being robbed. I see too many people being slaughtered, constantly. I do not know how anybody, Lori Lightfoot currently, and anybody else who vies for that job, wants a job where you wake up every morning to have somebody tell you who was killed, a 14-year-old was shot, a 4-year-old was savaged. I don't know who in their right mind would want to wake up to that every day, and that is the city. I know people who are afraid, a lot of people who are afraid to go out at night. Not any of you, but some of you may be uneasy about it. I don't know. I think I am ever hopeful about the city because I can grab a bit of hope. I can walk through Lincoln Park and look at a tree dying because it's fall and get some joy out of that, of the cycle of, it's a cycle of life. It's a cycle of life. And if you know, too many people I know have left the city and I resent them for it.
And was there a point when you said, that's it for Chicago, I'm moving to New York? Or I mean, you went to New York for a little while, I think, as I remember, did you not?
Yeah, but I was just fucking around. I just had a free place to live at Bowery and Houston, and I could stay there for 6 months and fool around. And the great thing about that, I didn't know what I was going to do there, but my father connected me with Ben Heck's widow, who would have me over for lunch once a month. Serious drinker, not quite to the Rick Kogan or young Tony Fitzpatrick level, but Rose Heck was a delightful person. She would just tell me stories about Benny, and it was tough living in New York when I lived there at Bowery and Houston. It was the 70s, and it was mean. You look at Manhattan. Look what Manhattan went through in the 70s, man. Now look at it. I don't want Chicago to become Manhattan, that's for sure, but it bounced back.
Yeah. What was your...
I'm not sure you'd be able to use much of this in my obituary.
It's too bleak?
No, it would have to be, unless it's going to be 3 times as long as a regular obituary. You'd get down to, and then Rick Kogan wrote for this people and this people and this people. And then one night he expounded on life in general in New York and the differences between New York and that.
What was your favorite, thinking of you as a radio guy for a second, what was your favorite interview? Or what were some of your favorite interviews?
On the radio
Yeah.
or in person?
Either one.
Joe Mantegna is a very, very good interview, but when I was working for a time at WBEZ, doing the afternoon shift, I interviewed a woman whose name escapes me now because I am old, who talked to me for an hour about what it was like to have her five children all murdered in Chicago. It was one of the most astonishing encounters I've ever had. Jamie O'Reilly and Michael Miles are great radio guests. Nestor Gomez is a great radio guest. But that's a joy of doing radio, because I do not know what's going to happen when I do it. If it's a book, I'll read the book. I do not have someone on and say, so, hey, how are you? Tell me what your book's about. Not interesting to me. Right. I've read it. I know what it's about. You know what I mean?
Right. And what about your big disasters?
What about what?
What about your big disasters as a journalist? What has ever gone wrong?
Well, I'm not going to tell you who she was, but I once early in my radio career had a woman on who had written a book about her uncle, who is a famous denizen of Bughouse Square. He talked about sex in Bughouse Square. And she came in, she was with her niece. She sat down, and I said, she was late, so we had to go right on. I said, well, hi, how are you? I am not well. Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. What is the matter? The details are too tragic. I'm looking at her niece going, hey. And it went on for an hour. Tell me about your uncle so-and-so. He was an interesting man. I will never, ever forget that interview. Thank you, Chris, for reminding me. I will never divulge the woman's name. She had what I found out after I did this excruciating interview. I find out after I say to the niece, hey, what the fuck is going on here, honey? She goes, oh, maybe I should have told you my aunt had a stroke 3 days ago. I said, you should have canceled the show. I will tell you before we end this, Osgood played a part in what may be the worst hour of radio in the history of modern radio. I got the great idea. Osgood and I had a bet. He said, you'll never stop smoking. I have, but I did. And I said, what do you want to bet? He said, well, if you stop smoking, I'll shave my beard. I go, he'd had it for 40 years. I go, okay, I'm devilish enough to buy that. So I stopped. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I know. Look, I have a Thanksgiving morning show. They've given me Thanksgiving morning. I want to have you come in and get shaved on the radio. Stupidest idea ever. It took me 2 days to find a barber who would come in and do this. I finally found a wonderful guy, still know him, named Mr. Barber. He was then Mr. Barber on Oak. I call him and say, yes, Mr. Barber on Oak. Yes, could you possibly, I've been turned down by 20 places, could you come in and shave someone on the radio? On the radio? What time? Where's the station? Tribune Tower. Do you have hot water there? I go, I'm sure we do. He came in and shaved Charlie on the air. It was so, here's my play-by-play. Yes, now Mr. Barber talked, the thick Russian accent. Mr. Barber is, what are you doing, Mr. Barber? I put the ladder on his Osgood face, okay? Now what are you doing? He's taking the razor, it's moving down Osgood's face. Part of his beard is coming off, part of his beard. His son, Zach, and daughter, Via, they literally start crying. They have never seen his face. They run out, so Charlie's children have run out of the studio. He keeps shaving some more. He's halfway done and we got to go to commercial. So I go, okay, we have to go to commercial. Mr. Barber has half the face shaved. Mr. Barber, how is it going? Rick, Osgood, he has face smooth like a baby behind. He started growing his beard back immediately.
All right, last question. So what shall I ask Rick Kogan? I guess, you had all these people talking about you. So what did anybody leave out? Do you feel known as a writer? Do you feel known? Do you feel this room knows you and who you are and what you care about, what you write about? Or do you feel that there's something that we haven't seen?
It's a very interesting question. How many Kukla, Fran, and Ali fans are there here? For Christ's sake. I do think, Chris, I've been doing it long enough that people who have read me long enough know a bit about me. Until I write, the great American novel, and they still won't know me then. It'll all be, bullshit because it's fiction. It'll be fiction. But I like to think that I don't try to hide myself, and I don't write a lot about myself. But I think the sensibility, I think in the stories I choose and in the way I tell them, I think people, I don't know. You think you know me, folks?
Rick Kogan, everybody.
Well, we're at the very end of the evening here, and you hear the champagne corks popping. My name is Don Evans, and I am the founding executive director of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. I told them that it was okay if they were making noise, because mostly what I'm here to do is filibuster. Everybody here is going to be invited to have a glass of champagne or an alternative beverage. Judy Royko is going to come out here for a toast. She's going to give a toast, and everybody's going to get it here, because I know a lot of people are worried right now about their parking meters, and they're going to run off and so forth, and others of us are going to go downstairs where Eli's Cheesecake, the Billy Goat Tavern, and Gibson's Steakhouse have all brought food for us to enjoy downstairs. And you can't have it until I'm done up here, which means that everybody has to listen to me talk a little bit about the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame and a little bit about some of the people that made this happen tonight. Now, most of this is in the program. We've thanked our partners, and by partners, we mean people that gave us food and provided money and things that, we often I'll get a hold of people and they'll say, well, we don't have the budget. And you know that you're like a different sort of organization because not having the budget's not the same as we don't have the money. The Chicago Literary Hall of Fame never has the money. Other people don't have the budget, but we don't have the money. So in order to do this, what we did tonight and what we're going to do, what we've done in the past and in the future, people help. A lot of people help. And they're here tonight. You see them, volunteers and partners and so forth. So first, Rick Kogan. For the last 10 days at least, people have been calling me, and you know who you are. I'm looking at you. Hey, I didn't register, but I really have to come, emailing me, texting me. Well, it's just one or two. There were about 400 people that wanted to come to the ceremony tonight, and only 150 seats. And that's a testament to how beloved Rick Kogan is. So thanks, Rick Kogan, for being our honoree tonight. Next, Leela and Ziggy. They're the owners of the Chopin Theater. This is such a spectacular place, and those two are such wonderful people. And part of the reason why we're making noise right now is Ziggy's very nervous about this toast. And he's wants to make sure everybody has, it's going to happen. You're going to all get glasses and you're going to drink and everything. But this place is an institution that epitomizes what Chicago is and can be. They do things here over and over and over again that are just wonderful, and they do it because they love the arts, they love people, they love humanity, they love conversation. So thanks to Leela and Ziggy for having us here tonight. All right, so just a little bit about Chicago Literary Hall of Fame, then I want to thank our partners tonight. I probably most of you are the same. I hate. I bring you more. Oh, thank you. I hate asking people for money. But then I find that if I don't ask them for money, they don't give me money. And so we used to, so there's all kinds of emails and phone calls, because there's a lot of things that I'm not good at, and most things I'm not good at. In fact, and this is, in all honesty, all these people here, they're covering for my gross incompetence. And this is not, I'm not belittling myself. All the technology, there's so much that I just don't have any idea how to do, and raising money is one of them. So there's meetings and emails and all these things. And one of the things that always happens is they say, well, we got to do this. We have to have this, and we got to do a self-stamped envelope and give it to everybody that comes out. And we've done that, a bunch of times, and I've got a couple of them here. And nobody ever returns them. The only person that returned the one from the last ceremony was Roberta Rubin, who I see about once a week or every other week, and who's on our board. And she could have easily handed me a check, and so I'm too cheap to waste all the stamps. So everybody here knows, you can go to our website, you can find out our address. If you want to give us money, we can use it. Some of you have already given us money tonight, and that helped make this happen. And part of the money goes not only to an occasion like this, but to, on November 3rd, we're going to induct our next induction class into the Hall of Fame. Ethel Payne, Carol Shields, and Ray Bradbury will be inducted on that night. So any kind of donations you give will be used not only for occasions like tonight, but that and so many other things. So that's it for that. And then finally, everybody is getting champagne, and it's going to take about, 2 minutes. So that's about how long it's going to take to thank the people who helped to sponsor tonight. I'm going to find the page here in a second. In addition to, of course, Brian and Tony and Jamie and Michael and Nestor and Barbara and Leela and all the people that were on stage tonight and all the people that contributed to this program. Okay, and here's another thing I need to tell you. This will definitely happen tomorrow, and I'm going to be so irritated. One of you in the audience will email me or call me tomorrow and say, I was at the ceremony last night, and I was wondering if I could get a couple extra programs. And there are 150 extra programs there. Take all you want, because that's why we brought them. But tomorrow, when you email or call me, I've got to get a fucking envelope, put your address on it, go to the post office, mail it, and I've either got shit to do or
It's okay. It's okay.
or things that I would rather do. So take all the programs you want. So here we go. Donald LaPietra and Bill Curtis. Curtis Productions. Just wonderful people. You all know them, I think. They do so much for our cultural community. They helped out tonight. The American Writers Museum, Carrie Cranston and Christopher Burrows. I know they're downstairs because I was down there. It's kind of the cool guys club downstairs. There's a video down there and everybody's watching it, and they have access to the bar and everything. But they didn't register, and they got stuck downstairs. And so if you want to come to the induction ceremony on November 3rd, and there are flyers for that, register now. We need you to do that. I am not going to take more calls on this one. I'm just shutting off my phone. WGN Radio, of course, wonderful help tonight for everything. The Newberry Library, the Cliff Dwellers. I know Leslie Recht is here tonight. I didn't see Eve Moran. You're here, okay. I don't have my glasses on, so. Eckhart's Press, Dave Stern's here. I don't know, is Rick Camphor here? Eckhart's Press, the Billy Goat, Gibsons, and Eli's. You're going to enjoy their food in a minute. Seminary Co-op, Open Books, the Bookseller, and I know that Augie and Tracy are here tonight. Chicago Writers Association, All Things Literary. I know Chicago, it's really Cheryl Johnson is All Things Literary, but she is one of the most important people in our whole literary culture, and she's right there. Thank you for helping us tonight. Chicago Quarterly Review, I know Syed is here tonight. I know Gary Houston's here tonight. Guild Literary Complex. Paul Teodo and Tom Myers, just came out with a story collection called South of Cermak. Get it. I know Paul and Tom are both here tonight. Thank you. Judy, Kate, and Sam Royko, they're going to come. Why don't you start, Judy and Sam and Kate, start making your way down so you can make the toast. Lamb's Farm, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Bar Association, and that's it, I hope, because I don't have a program anymore. So Judy is going to lead a toast. Does everybody have champagne now? I have some here. More. I got everybody, I think. You want to take the...
Sure. Okay. All right, everybody, raise your glasses.
I think we're waiting 1 second.
Okay. All right, because I could go on and on with this toast, but I won't. Everybody ready? Okay. All right, raise your glasses. Here's to Rick Kogan, the best in the business. And beyond that, our friend, who enriches our lives and is one of the finest people we will ever know. And so to Rick, and to many more rounds of drinks with him in the future.
Thank you, Roykos, Judy and Sam. So there's food downstairs. It is free. It's a cash bar. So, you know, you're on your own for the bar. But make your way downstairs if you're staying and enjoy the food, and everybody's going to hang out for a while.